We're discussing a film called Tijuana Jews, and there are 6 different congregational partners that joined together to bring you this program. Houston Congregation for Reform Judaism, Congregation Torah El in Oakhurst, New Jersey, East Brunswick Jewish Center, East Brunswick, New Jersey. We also have the Jewish Federation of Ventura County out in Ventura, California. Congregation Beth Israel in West Hartford, Connecticut. They're our Connecticut representative. And then B'nai Shalom in West Orange, New Jersey. And of course, the film by Isaac Artenstein, who's with us today, Tijuana Jews. And here is part of the trailer to get you back.
Oye, ve y dice, ¿qué haces? De Buenos Aires vas a Tijuana.
Amigos míos me decían, te vas a Tijuana, qué horror, ahí la gente.
Todo eran puro showtime, showtime, showtime.
Tijuana era muy parecido, podríamos decir, que las películas del oeste.
Pero mi marido nunca quitó el dedo del renglón, que él quería irse a Tijuana, entonces yo decía, está loco.
Yo venía nomás por 6 meses aquí a Tijuana y ya nos casamos, tuvimos 7 hijos y ya.
Porque dicen que el que toma agua de la presa no se va.
Tijuana es la capital del mundo.
There's our little video preview, and Isaac Artenstein is with us today to talk about his film Tijuana Jews. And Isaac is the founder of Cinewest Productions, a company he developed over 20 years ago to create and distribute documentaries focusing on the Americas and the Southwest. Of late, he's been focused on his Frontier Jews series, which includes a number of films, including To the Ends of the Earth, a portrait of Jewish San Diego, which may have to be the next film we discuss, we'll see. A Long Journey to the Hidden Jews of the Southwest, which is a film about really mostly crypto Jews and people finding their Jewish identity in the Southwest. Hollow Rising in the Desert, the Jews of New Mexico. And of course, the film, a documentary from back in 2005, Tijuana Jews, which we're going to discuss today. And he also has some exciting new projects too. So today, this is very much a Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout the program, please put them in the chat. I'll get to them, and maybe we can stump Isaac, who knows, although he's probably not a novice at doing this type of stuff, to talk about his films. But so feel free to put any questions you have, comments about the film, anything you want to know in the chat, and we'll get to those. But I will start with the first question today. And you talked about this briefly just before I showed the video there, Isaac, but go deeper if you can about your motivation behind doing a film on the Jewish community of Tijuana. And I guess also your films of late have also kind of been in this vibe of Jewish communities. How much did the Tijuana Jews film lead to the film about New Mexico, the film about the crypto Jews in San Diego?
Sure. Well, excuse me. Well, first of all, thank you, Justin, and thank you all the congregations for getting this event together. What is this? Is this our third Q&A that we've done together, Justin?
Yeah, so my congregation, we've done 3. So we in March, we did the A Long Journey to the Hidden Jews of the Southwest, and then August, we did Hollow Rising in the Desert. And I think also Hollow Rising, the Jewish Federation of Ventura County jumped on as well. So we probably got some people on here today that watched 3 of your films, 2 of your films, or just 1 of your films.
Yeah, well, I just want to reiterate my appreciation. You put on a really good show, Justin. I mean, it's so well produced. And for the longest time, especially when I taught, I was always against this online teaching and online presentations. But my God, we've got people from 2 countries, from states, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, and all over the place. So what a wonderful opportunity to have dialogue. And I can't think of a better way to spend my Sunday afternoon. Well, your question was, how did this film come about? And I started kind of tongue in cheek. I got tired of people asking me, how does an Artenstein come from Mexico? Most people don't know that there's a Jewish population in Mexico, as there is in practically every Latin American country. Argentina, at one point, I believe when the state of Israel was formed in 1948, there was more Jews living in Argentina than in Israel, just to give you a kind of a relationship there. But so anyways, the other reason that was very, very important to me, I was always the kid in the family that would sit down with my grandparents and just listen to those great stories. You know, you ask a Jew where they're from, they don't tell you a country, they give you a story, you know. Well, we got out of Russia right after the pogroms, but we didn't have a visa, so we had to stop in Istanbul. And from Istanbul, we were there with for 3 months. And then, oh, and by the way, I'm talking about one of my uncles, I'm not just making this up. They got to Galveston, but there was quotas in the 1920s, so they had to go to Tampico. That's how my uncle Nathan Golden got to Mexico. So Tijuana Jews is a way of my contribution to kind of our Jewish cultural history. And, you know, and again, preserving these stories, a lot of these, you know, my grandparents, there's people in Tijuana Jews that are no longer with us. I mean, I have my own father who passed away, but I was so happy to be able to capture his testimonials. My grandmother also, I was able to interview her, and they're just fascinating stories. And those two kind of goals I've met, but I've also, as the projects have expanded, you know, I've done another documentary, A Portrait of Jewish San Diego to the Ends of the Earth, another one, Hollow Rising in the Desert, that many of you saw, The Jews of New Mexico, A Long Journey. Well, you know, Justin mentioned them all. And one of the things, the third reason that I keep on doing these projects that I find very illuminating to me and to my audiences, and I'll tell you a tale that whenever I do one of these documentaries, there's about 40 hours of interviews. How do you boil down, edit down 40 hours into a 1 hour documentary, which is usually a good broadcast length? How do you do it? I mean, what stays in the proverbial editing room floor, which is now the backup disk drive, that's the editing room floor, and what gets on the screen? And my editor, who I've been very fortunate to work with about 3 out of those 4 films, Keith Shapiro, he got a plug-in to our editing system that automatically transcribes all the interviews. So we get sort of the paper text or the PDF text, if you will, and we kind of go our ways for an entire week. We don't go to the editing room, and we look at the interviews, and we first try to, what is unique about this documentary? What is unique about this Jewish community? What is the theme? What is the theme? And based on that theme or themes, we select testimonials, interview sound bites, if you will. In our profession, we call them the A-roll. All the interview is the A-roll. The B-roll is what we use to illustrate the A-roll. So the A-roll is interviews. The B-roll is photographs, old footage, historical footage, or movies, graphics, you name it. So we first try to do a selection with a theme in mind of what are the testimonials that address that theme in an effort to kind of narrow down the content. So we come back with the proverbial, you know, yellow highlighted sections, and we are usually pretty accurate, about an hour long. We share those testimonials, we start putting them together, and in the A-roll, 1 hour of A-roll of testimonials, of interviews, which my editor jokingly calls the radio cut, because if you turn down the screen, it sounds like a radio program. It's just a bunch of talking heads. We've not illustrated them. And then this is the third reason that where I do these documentaries, and I find them so interesting. What are the themes? What are the themes that each of these Jewish documentaries have? And we always say there's 3 themes: identity, identity, and identity. Those are the 3 major themes. And oh, excuse me one second. sorry about that. Along these themes, that really is the fundamental one. I mean, there's other ones, of course. Jewish life, Jewish culture is very rich. It's very textured. And personally, what I find fascinating about our identities is that, people ask, what is a Jew? What, does anybody have a straight, answer to that? And what I have found is that besides the religious aspect, which of course we are a religion with many manifestations, there's Orthodox, conservative, there's Reform, there's Sephardic, there's Ashkenazi. And when we start talking about Sephardic, Ashkenazi, the other very important component about our identity as Jews is that we are a grouping of ethnicities. When you saw Tijuana Jews, you very clearly saw a bunch of Mexican Jews. That's what we are. And if you go to Argentina, you will find a clearly defined ethnicity of Argentinian Jews. They have a unique accent, unique food ways that are Jewish, but they are Jewish Argentinian. Of course, Ethiopian Jews, there's Moroccan Jews, there's, Eastern European, Ashkenazi Jews, and then, there's subdivisions, get this, when I visited my cousins in Mexico City, a larger Jewish community than the one I grew up with, there's about 50,000 Jews in Mexico City. There was at that time, when I was younger, 10 Jewish schools, day schools, K through 12, 10 of them in Mexico City. The largest sports community center I've seen in my entire life. It's the first time I saw an Olympic-sized pool in a JCC. It was Mexico City, and my cousins, like my grandpa, their dad was Polish, but not only was there a Polish Ashkenazi Jewish congregation, there was a Galicianer Jewish congregation from the region of Poland. So, and each one feeling very comfortable being with each other because of those similarities. And then the identities get more complex when we start talking about Sephardic, Converso, Anusim. A lot of people, again, not this audience, because I see this audience is very well versed in these different manifestations of Judaism, but it's just an ongoing discussion that I find very lively, very interesting, and also it makes me very proud that I come from an ethnicity, a tradition that is multilingual, multicultural, and I mean, we were the original multiculturalists before the word was termed and made popular in our educational systems. So those are the things that, in a long-winded way, motivated me to do Tijuana Jews and to continue with it. What was the other part of the question, Justin? I forgot, or maybe I answered it and I didn't even know.
I was asking about motivation, but also just, did this film kind of lead you to do the others that you said?
Yeah, it did. I mentioned earlier in our warm-up conversation before everybody joined up, I was, one of the first festivals that I attended with Tijuana Jews was a wonderful, wonderful Jewish film festival, the Tucson Jewish Film Festival. It's been going on for about 25 years, and wonderful audience. Tucson being close to the Mexican border, they're about an hour from Nogales, which is the border. People really connected, really liked it. We packed the house, had a great Q&A, and then the sponsors handed me a book. Isaac, have you heard of this book by the Rocklands, Harriet and Fred Rockland, called Pioneer Jews? I have it here in my book. Oh, here I have it. Are the letters flipped on your screen?
You're good. You're good.
They are?
No, you're good. Looks good.
And they asked me, did you know that, I'm putting up some B-roll to my interview. Anyways, so did you know that there was 5 Jewish mayors since the founding of Tucson as an American city after, the US took Arizona from Mexico. There was 5 Jewish mayors going back to the Old West. I said, I didn't know that, but it doesn't surprise me. Nothing surprises me about our presence, Jewish presence anywhere in the world anymore. And that's when the discussion started about doing other communities. And the Southwest border region being where I live, and, you know, as an artist, the region that nurtures my ideas, my vision, my intellectual and artistic curiosity, that's how it led to other areas of the Southwest. And very significantly, a long journey, the Hidden Jews of the Southwest had a unique genesis. We were showing my co-producer, Paula Amar Schwartz, who is from Albuquerque, by way of Squirrel Hill, Pittsburgh, the Jewish community there. We were having our Q&As with Hollow Rising in the Desert. And those of you that saw Hollow Rising in the Desert would remember that it was Jewish presence going back to colonial times. That's when we started talking about, you know, Sephardic Jews or Anusim, Converso Jews, the Jews that escaped the Inquisition in Mexico, ended up in northern New Mexico. And these are Catholic families. 300 years later, they discover their Jewishness or their Jewish descent. Grandma lights candles on Fridays. We bury our dead in pine boxes. We don't eat pork. We're Catholic, but we don't eat pork. So with DNA, with genealogical studies and pioneering scholars like Stanley Hurtis, indeed, there is, you know, this population that goes back that far. So anyways, the Q&A of Hollow Rising in the Desert, the Jews of New Mexico, we go all the way up to the present, you know, from colonial Jews to the Jews that came down the Santa Fe Trail and settled in the middle of the 1800s in Santa Fe, to later communities up to all the Jewish hippies that founded the communes in New Mexico with, you know, Reconstructionist rabbis, really interesting periods. But every single question with Hollow Rising would turn into a very unique phenomenon. Somebody would get up to ask a question, but they wouldn't ask a question. They would start this heartfelt, emotional testimonial. Well, listen, I really have to say this. I recently discovered that I'm Jewish, or I'm of Jewish descent, and they would, and you know, I have gotten my genealogy together. As a matter of fact, I'm applying for Spanish citizenship because I'm eligible because of a program that Spain had. And they would go on, and they would also, it would turn emotional because they would say right then and there, it's created a lot of problems with my family. Some of my family members don't believe that we're Jewish. And if we are, they don't appreciate me embracing Judaism. They no longer invite me to their Christmas dinners because they say, well, if you're Jewish, why would you want to come to our Christmas celebration? So, and that I think is because New Mexico is so traditional that Catholicism is very, very traditional in New Mexico. So my co-producer, Paula Amar Schwartz, and I looked at each other as we got to do the follow-up. We got to do something on the crypto Jews. And that miraculously came together because we got support from KNME, the New Mexico PBS affiliate. It was the fastest fundraising effort I've ever been involved with. Usually it takes 3 to 5 years to get funding for one of these documentaries. This happened in months instead of years. And so that was the latest one that I finished. We shot extensively in El Paso because of the Rabbi Leon at Congregational B'nai Zion, who is a pioneer rabbi in opening the doors of his congregation to those that want to return. They want to return to Judaism. He holds classes on both sides of the borders, El Paso and Juarez, for those people that want to return. He says, in your hearts, you're Jewish. So I'm not really feeling like I'm doing a conversion. We're really learning about Judaism so you can return. You're not converting. You were Jewish, but you were forced to convert. Your ancestors were forced to convert to Catholicism. You're returning. But he says, we're gonna do the whole conversion because I want you to be kosher in case you want to make aliyah, whatever. You are fully converted into Judaism. So we shot extensively in El Paso, those of you that saw A Long Journey, and that has led to the new project on El Paso, which as a border city, I just love it. We're gonna start shooting the 23rd of this month. We've done extensive pre-production. We pre-interviewed a lot of people, and I have some family roots there, and I discovered people that knew my grandparents when they had a shop in Juarez, Mexico. They had a curio shop on the Mexican side of the border, like my dad had on the Mexican side of the border in Tijuana. You saw him. So it's also been kind of a personal exploration for me. So I'll bring the personal angle to this documentary about El Paso. So that, again, one documentary led to the other. And Rabbi Leon jokingly says, well, this documentary about El Paso is no longer about colonial Jews. This is the Marty Robbins El Paso. And those of you old enough know what I'm talking about.
So we have some good questions on the chat here, so I'd like to get to those. This is from Maureen. Going back to the Tijuana, Mexico that you grew up in, and the practice of Judaism there, how would you describe the practice? Was it orthodoxy, conservative? How would you describe, or what was the?
Yeah, a good, very, very good question. In Mexico, to this day, Jews don't define themselves as Orthodox, conservative, or Reform. It's mostly along ethnic lines. There are three major congregations, if you will. If you go to Mexico City, and in Tijuana, we were so small that we all got together for our services, all congregations, but there is the Ashkenazi, of course, the Sephardic, and the Mizrahi, or the Arabic Jewish community. And in Mexico, you find three distinct congregations with different temples, different schools. But if you were to put a kind of a parameter, not a parameter, if you were to define it, it's mostly a conservative type of congregation with, of course, some Orthodox. There's Chabad in Mexico, and also American Jews that have moved to Mexico City because of work reasons or whatever. There is an American Jewish community there. They have their own Reform temple. So that's the only manifestation of Reform Judaism in Mexico. That specific congregation, I think, is Bethel. Don't quote me on that. But, and interestingly, the American rabbi in Mexico City he's the go-to person for those people that want to marry somebody that's not Jewish. He makes the conversion a lot easier. And I must say that the great popularity of Rabbi Leon from El Paso when he goes to Mexico is that he facilitates these conversions. In Mexico, they're much more stricter, they're much more traditional, they're more exclusive, if I can use the word, about allowing people to convert to Judaism. So that Reform congregation in Mexico City serves a good purpose in that regard. It's a bit more inclusive.
And here's a question from Rhoda. So you, in the later part of the film, you talk about this place called the Ken, which is San Diego, a Jewish center there in which really Mexicans, Latin Americans gathered and did things, maintain their Spanish and things of that nature. Did activities. What does the Ken? What she wants to know, Ken? What does that mean, or what does that refer to?
I think literally, besides being yes in Hebrew, I remember that much from my Hebrew classes. Ken also means the nest. And the Ken, if you remember, starts in Tijuana. One of the ways that I noticed Mexican Jews, coming from Mexico City, they place a lot of emphasis on having activities for the Jewish youth. I mean, that's for all communities around the world, I'm sure. There's JCCs, but in Mexico City, there's a big focus on, or in Mexico in general, wherever there's a Jewish community, besides the school, having after-school activities, weekend activities as for youth, and specifically with a Jewish identity as a central part of that activity. So it started in Tijuana, then it came across the border to San Diego, and I deal with it in the portrait of Jewish San Diego because the Ken has grown exponentially. They've teamed up with San Diego Jewish Academy and they have incredible facilities. But what's most fascinating about the Ken Jewish community in San Diego, that it's mostly everything is conducted in Spanish. A lot of these kids, they're the sons, daughters, grandsons, granddaughters of Mexican Jews, and they've never lived a day in Mexico, but they're totally fluent and literate in Spanish, and the activities are conducted in Spanish. And it's really funny because there's also a large South African Jewish community, large proportionally, in San Diego, and they like that vibe. Their diaspora took them to South Africa, and a very small community, obviously. So when they came to San Diego, they really connected with Mexican Jews at the Ken. Another interesting aspect about the San Diego Jewish community, a border community, is proportionally, we have the largest foreign-born Jews of any other community in the US, proportionally. Obviously, New York has more foreign-born Jews than anywhere in the US, but in San Diego, our percentage of Jews, 20% are foreign-born between the Mexican Jews, South African Jews, Israeli Jews, and Russian Jews. That constitutes that 20% of foreign-born in San Diego and its Jewish community.
And here's three questions. Kind of, the unique part of this film, Isaac, is that it was completed in 2005, right? And so, we're 16 years beyond that. And so here's some questions kind of looking at how things may have changed.
Sure.
We talk about. So Sandra wants to know, what has changed since you released the film in 2005? Another similar question comes from Linda. She says, the feeling I had was that there was no problem of Jews going back and forth to San Diego and the United States. How has that changed or not changed? And also, similar, Susan mentioned that she got the impression that, there's not many Jews living in Tijuana anymore. Many moved to Southern California or elsewhere. And is that true? So kind of, how has the landscape changed since the film was produced as far as?
Yeah, well, essentially, all the comments were correct. You've kind of answered each and every one of those questions. There is less Jews living in Tijuana. The Jewish Community Center is still standing, but it's changed its character. As many of you might know, many Americans, among them American Jews, retire in Baja California. The weather is wonderful. The cost of living, much lower. So those American Jews, most of them retired, living in Baja California, Rosarito, I'm sure a town you've heard before, Ensenada, being close to the beach, has a good amount of retired American Jews. They come for the high holidays to the JCC in Tijuana. Also, the Jews that remain there, have, made it a point to keep the community alive. There's Shabbat services, there's high holiday services. And for some reason on Wednesdays, they have a community lunch. You can drop in on Wednesdays and, schmooze with your fellow Jews, have lunch with them. As with any Jewish community, Mexican Jews love to eat. They have a wonderful kosher kitchen. And that's another kind of weekly activity, if you will, besides the holidays. Now, most of the Jews from Tijuana have moved to the American side, like my family. And that started originally because in the 1960s, as I mentioned in my documentary, parents wanted their kids to go to American schools. At that time, Tijuana, the state of Baja California, did not have hardly any universities when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s. So the option was, once you graduated high school in Tijuana, very good high schools in Tijuana, you either had to go to Mexico City, Guadalajara, or across the border to go to a university. So parents said, you know, why don't we get them started early? Have them go to high school on the American side, so they would start moving to the American side. Now, having said that, my dad commuted every day of his active business life back to Tijuana. He had that curio shop in Tijuana. So he did kind of a backwards commute, if you will. Most people come to work in the US from Mexico. He went from the US to Mexico to work every day, as do many members of the San Diego Jewish community with businesses in Tijuana, such as my brother. And just as a technical thing, there is a special card called the Sentry card, which gives, it's like the global card, you know, when you come, you get like fast crossings at the airports, which really facilitates commerce between Mexico and the US, the Sentry card. And one of the things that we at the border get really upset about and sometimes laugh about, how the border is seen as a scenario or a landscape of criminality and wrongdoing and bad hombres. We here at the border see it as a very fluid and dynamic business environment. The amount of trade that takes place between our both countries, my two countries, because I am from Mexico and the US, our two countries, is very, very dynamic. I mean, the commercial entries, which is a whole separate entry, the amount of trailer trucks going back and forth is amazing. And people have relatives on both sides of the border. So there is that dynamic that is reflected in the Mexican Jewish community in Tijuana. Again, the Ken has grown exponentially. The JCC is largely, it is very much a Chabad congregation. It's probably the only congregation, the only Chabad congregation with a pool, with, you know, incredible facilities. They've got a great mikvah. So Chabad got a JCC in the deal, and we're very happy for it that should you happen to be in Tijuana, you can drop in at the JCC and participate in our communal celebrations, observations, and what have you. There is that Jewish presence still in Tijuana, and it is a Chabad congregation.
I'm going for the lunch.
Okay. I gotta say something. It's something that people get a real kick out of, you know. Mexican Jewish moms, what do they do with the Shabbat brisket? Well, the next day for lunch, you have brisket tacos with fresh red salsa. And Jewish Mexican moms are the only moms in the Jewish world that get their gefilte fish eaten for Passover. Most gefilte fish seders, you take a nibble with a herring, I mean with the radish, and you push it aside. Jewish moms make the gefilte fish with Veracruz sauce. Have you ever had Veracruz fish? It's the most delicious, tomato-based, onions, garlic, tomato, capers. So they cook the gefilte fish for the Seder in this Veracruz style sauce. And again, Jewish moms are the only ones that get asked for seconds for gefilte fish in the Seder. So yes, Justin, you'll have a wonderful menu when you visit us at the JCC in Tijuana.
Do you have an idea, you know, as you mentioned, the Jewish community of Tijuana is, you know, very different than it used to be. Any idea of like what we're talking, like, you know, in the glory days, like how many Jews were in Tijuana?
Good question. I think we were never a large community, maybe 600 individuals. I don't know how many families that would be. Now, maybe there's 150 living there.
Gotcha. I guess this is more of a kind of a film related question. In looking at, in this idea that, this film was produced 16 years ago, and looking at kind of like documentary film, since it's been that long, are there any different, I don't know, like trends that you've noticed that are different in documentary film? Like for example, maybe now people, I think in some other films you were able to use like a drone camera, and maybe that didn't exist 16 years ago.
You keep on answering your own questions, Justin. Yes, the drone. But go ahead. Yeah, there is some stylistic. Yeah.
I'm curious, since yeah.
Well, for one thing, we're doing things digitally. Although Tijuana Juice was one of the first digital films I shot, we shot on digital tape. We're not filmmakers anymore. We don't use film. We're not video makers anymore. We don't use tape, if you will, videotape. We now shoot into disk drives. So that's a technology that has totally revolutionized both our production, but more importantly, in terms of impact, post-production. Our ability to process data and content because of digital systems is just amazing. Digital media facilitates that wonderful technique that Ken Burns pretty much pioneered, where you actively move very dynamically and story-wise on black and white photos, those great documentaries he makes on the Civil War, the 1920s, the jazz era, baseball. Those black and whites come alive, and digital technology has really impacted our creative approaches to that. It has facilitated them. Not to get too techie, but before digital technology, Ken Burns, in order to achieve that effect, which we now call the Ken Burns effect, moving, creatively inside the photograph, he would have to set up a animation stand with a photograph on the base and the camera on top shooting down, shoot frame by frame, 24 frames per second, and program the moves and send it to the lab, get the work print, and see if the move worked. Now we do it in real time. And for me, stylistically, I am as interested in creating a certain mood in my storytelling, where sometimes I have the chorus film, which is 40 people being interviewed, as you saw in Tijuana Juice, whereas in A Long Journey, I follow certain specific individuals. The Converso cowboy, Tim Herrera from Cuba, New Mexico, Rabbi Leon, Blanca Carrasco, who, after finding out about her Judaism, literally she was the president of the B'nai Zion Sisterhood, in charge of its newsletter. So I follow distinct individuals. So it's 6 individuals as opposed to what we call the chorus approach. So that's been a shift in my documentary filmmaking. These 6 representative individuals provide a unique approach to the topic. Whereas in El Paso, I'm going back to the chorus. I think I'm interviewing about 30 people. It lends itself to that. And another thing that's really kind of facilitated by the drone, and the drone is no longer just for aerial shots. I mean, I can have a drone at eye level traveling. I mean, I just came back from Baja California, documenting the Camino Real in Baja California. And we go through the Camino Real at eye level, like you're cruising through this old royal highway. So the drone has a very dynamic, if you will, visual storytelling capability. And what I've done is I like to incorporate, as I did in both, well, most recently in A Long Journey, The Hidden Jews, the cultural and the natural landscapes. And I sort of allow for a break in the interviews after a whole series of interviews, I kind of go to the drone or the photos and let the audience sort of cogitate and sort of assimilate the amount of information that I've thrown at them about being Jewish and Jewish history by using imagery that kind of lends itself to a little break in the testimonials, but it also allows imagery, like I said, cultural and natural landscapes, for us to sort of meditate and transition into the next block of information that I'll be doing. And another thing that I like to do is get away a little bit from chronological editing. In my more recent films like Hollow Rising, A Long Journey, it's more of an elliptical kind of approach where I don't do, colonial Jews, next, frontier, pioneer Jews, next, the scientist Jews of Los Alamos. I kind of interweave those periods of time in a creative way, so it has more of a different dynamic. So each period, rather than just beginning, middle, and end for each period, they kind of comment on each other, it creates a different relationship for the audience. So those are some of the aesthetic production kind of evolutions, if you will, in my own craft of filmmaking. The other thing that I have to mention, that it is a constant in all of our filmmaking, whether it's feature films, dramatic films, which I've done, or documentary films, is storytelling is central. The narrative structures are very similar when I make a documentary and when I make a feature 1 hour and a half dramatic film. There is, a narrative arc, if you will, a 3-act structure, a beginning, middle, and end. So the structuring is very much similar in a narrative fictional film as it is in a documentary film. You have to tell a story by which you engage your audience. And both formats, documentary and dramatic, respond to those, if you will, structural formulas, which you can subvert. I mean, you don't have to always, like the famous French filmmaker of the French New Wave, he says, every film must have a beginning, a middle, and an end, even if it's not in that order.
And you mentioned, you talked about you interviewed about 40 people, and I'm curious, since so many people, Tijuana Jewish community changed, was it hard to track down these people to interview? Were they still in Tijuana?
Both actually at that time, there was more Jews living in Tijuana, so we interviewed on both sides of the border, but I think the majority was edging towards the American side.
Got it.
So we probably interviewed 60 to 70% on the American side. There is a community in the San Diego County, those of you that know it and those of you that don't, that we call the South Bay. That's where a lot, it's the closest community to the border. It's a town of Chula Vista, which is about 20 minutes from downtown San Diego. So that's where a lot of the Mexican Jews were living at the time. Right now, there's a temple, the old Congregation's temple, Beth Israel, I believe it was called, in San Diego, that went back to the 1800s. The last temple they had downtown, which is where all the Jewish temples were, was on 3rd and Laurel. I mean, literally downtown, steps away from our wonderful Balboa Park, where the famous San Diego Zoo is. That congregation from the 20s, a beautiful Mediterranean-style congregation, is now where most Mexican and Latino Jews congregate, such as my mom. That's where she likes. Others have gone more to the North County, which is where the tonier neighborhoods are, La Jolla, Del Mar. But the first wave of Mexican Latino Jews congregated. They literally took over that temple, I should say, on 3rd and Laurel. It was slated to be demolished for condos. It was a miraculous effort by conservation groups, the Jewish community, to preserve it. And it's now wonderfully preserved historical temple from the 20s, headed by Rabbi Meltzer. And so that is, kind of the home now for many of the Mexican Jews.
And here's a question from Susan and Craig, kind of talking about the Ashkenazi and also Sephardic Jews that were living in Tijuana. So at first, the film shows how both communities, Ashkenazi, Sephardic, they worked well together. They played together, had a good time. And then the Sephardic community, they didn't have a fight with the Ashkenazis, but they kind of decided to split away from them.
Yeah.
Why was that?
Why was that? Well, there's a testimonial by the then president, Isidoro Lombroso, and it was just, typical, they didn't like the way they prayed. The Sephardim thought that the Ashkenazi prayed too fast, and, in Yiddish pronunciation, the T is an S, and Sephardim have a more of the Hebrew phonetic, one letter, one sound, and I'm kind of, and it was a little bit tribal, but so they did split up because of those reasons, those differences. The Sephardim kept the Magen David congregation, where my mom was a member of as a young teenager, and the Ashkenazim created the Hatikva congregation. By the time I started going to temple as a kid, they had joined back together. So Hatikva had joined back both congregations. We had a nice hall downtown Tijuana, 4th Avenue, about 5 blocks from my dad's store. But as a kid at the Hatikva, when the congregations had joined, there was 2 prayer rooms, the main one, and then there was a side one, both of them with their Torahs. And I would ask, Mom, why are there some people praying in one room, like my grandpa, and some of my uncles and my dad are praying in the other room? Oh, well, the one room prays faster and the other room, that was the thing, prays slower, and they just get a little impatient. Of course, I found out later that the Sephardim like to pray in one room and the Ashkenazi in the other. When my mom, who's of Sephardic descent, and my dad of Ashkenazi descent, we jokingly said that they were considered a mixed marriage. But again, Tijuana being so small, we couldn't afford to be separate. Literally, we couldn't afford to keep 2 congregations. So we came back together.
I'll ask one more question. If anyone else has a question, we'll take it as well. One thing that I thought was interesting was, I think Nathan Golden, I think he was the president of the Jewish community at one point, and he said, or they talked about how, he kind of invited the outside world to participate. So in govern, to kind of be very inclusive, and they sang both anthems. And I'm curious if, today is the relationship, in Tijuana, perhaps in other Mexican cities, good between Jews and Mexican communities?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And one of the factors is that I don't want to take too much credit, because my uncle Nathan was one of the pioneers in bringing communities together. By the way, the Ken would also allow non-Jewish kids to join. They had, again, being such a small community, you didn't only have Jewish friends. You had friends from all backgrounds. And so a lot of kids that were not Jewish, but their families were close friends of our, moms and dads, they would also join us. Uncle Nathan also made a very concentrated effort to reach out to the mayors, to the governors. He was quite the politician, very charming, those of you that remember him in the documentary. He was a combination of like Cary Grant and George Raft. He had a real tough side to him, but he had the good looks and kind of the kindness of a Cary Grant, the charm. And that's how we rolled in Tijuana. In Mexico City, very, very different. Mexico City Jews had a large enough congregation to kind of like New York, all of your friends are Jewish. I mean, I'm generalizing, please forgive me. But you can lead a very Jewish life in Mexico City. All your friends, your schoolmates, your social circle can be Jewish. You can choose to do that. You can eat kosher every day. That's how Mexico City is different. And again, the other component of Jewish Mexico City is that those old divisions, those separations. When I was a kid, I would visit Mexico City. The Ashkenazi Jews would not really get along with the Arabic Jews, and vice versa. I remember when my sister became engaged to my brother-in-law, who was of the Arabic Jewish community. The family was not very, the Arabic family, I mean, a lot of diplomatic entreaties had to be made to the Arabic Jewish matriarch of the family before she approved it. She had to approve the marriage. I mean, it was that traditional. And I have a friend of mine who's a writer, a wonderful writer, Jacobo Sefami, wrote a beautiful novel about that community. He married an American Jewish woman. And I asked his wife, how did it feel when you went down there to meet the family? She says, Isaac, it felt like I was watching a National Geographic documentary. It was so different culturally. But I must say, with that wonderful JCC in Mexico City, Centro Deportivo Israelita, and it's a must stop when you do your Mexico City Jewish tour. With sports activities and stuff, the community started getting together, kids hung out and, you know, married among the different communities. I was going to say intermarried, they're all Jewish, but there is more of a tighter connection between the three Jewish communities. And suffice to say that the mayor or the head of the government for Mexico City, the capital of Mexico, the largest city, is of Jewish descent. Claudia Scheinbaum, not a religious Jew, secular, does not identify so much with the Jewish community, but both her parents are Jewish, Sephardic and Ashkenazi, her parents. So that maybe foretells of the relationship between, you know, Mexicans, Catholic or otherwise, and Jews in Mexico. And I have to say something that I deal with in my documentary, Tijuana Jews, that it was always kind of a contradiction on the surface that Jews in the most Catholic country probably in the world, Mexico, we actually felt quite comfortable. Not that there wasn't anti-Semitism. I'm not trying to sugarcoat that aspect of it. And there was, you know, the kind of the old school Catholic, you know, there would be one kid in class who would say, Isaac, you killed Jesus Christ. I would go, what? When did I do that? But the first ones to defend me were my Catholic friends. Kind of makes me emotional when I think about it now. And but I love Mexico. I mean, there was really an open up. And one of the reasons I should say it's very historical, the presence of the Catholic Church, you have to know, remember if you read about history, the Catholic Church, it was partnered with the Spanish crown in governing the colonies, in governing Spain. Spain was the most Catholic country in that it never broke off from the church. There was church authorities and secular authorities, but they were all in cahoots together. The Inquisition prosecuted Jews, and you know, the church and the government, you know, burned them at the stake. It was that simple. It was very, so Mexico after independence still suffered from that direct connection of the church and the state, even though it was a secular state. Catholicism was still the official religion after the independence in the 1820s, and subsequently, you could not get married if you weren't Catholic, simply stated. You could not get married. There was a lot of restrictions on other religions. And then in the 1850s, many of you have heard of Benito Juarez, the liberal constitution was enacted, which had the strictest separation of church and state practically of any country. I got to tell you, when I was growing up in Mexico, the word God could not be pronounced in your classroom. And then it was a shocker to me coming to the States that we would have Christian benedictions in class. We would pledge allegiance to the flag and to God, for which it stands, whatever. So that really radical separation of church and state made it comfortable for a Jew like me to grow up and really feel a strong identity and connection with Mexico. And again, I don't mean to sugarcoat it, because there was and is a level of anti-Semitism, but the government has our back. It really does. The government will be the first to suppress any type of religious persecution and so on. And they always take a good stand.
I'd also like to share, as we close here, you were talking about Mexico City, and we have someone on the call today who has some family ties
Sure.
to the Mexico Jewish community. Maureen, her daughter and family have been living in Mexico City for 7 years, and she's found that most congregations are Sephardic and Orthodox, and that there's a very, very wealthy Mexico City as well.
Absolutely. I don't know if most are Sephardic. The main congregation, the largest one, well, I don't know the percentages, but I'm sure the family will tell you that there's three distinct congregations, and they're very prosperous. You now go to the Sephardic congregation, you don't just go to temple. I mean, they have 2 halls for weddings and bar mitzvahs, not 1, 2. They have a full theater for theatrical productions, let alone the sports, facilities. So Mexico has been very good to the Jews. I got to say that.
All right. Well, I want to thank Isaac for joining us this afternoon to talk about his film and his other films too, Tijuana Jews. And Isaac, you mentioned that October 23rd you're starting to shoot in El Paso. Is that right?
Yeah.
So if you pay well and you need some extras, I'm sure all of us will be on board for that. You're gonna fly.
Actually, you know what? I'd like to do other cities in Texas.
Okay.
So maybe that's what this should lead to, maybe something about the Houston region. I'm not going to extend this because, I think we're all getting Zoom fatigue these days, but the Galveston project, I'm sure many of you have heard about the Galveston project. As Ellis Island, New York became highly impacted with Jewish immigration, and there were worries that there would be kind of a backlash against Jews. So many Jews in New York, they started bringing Jews through Galveston. And that's how you get Jews in many areas of, for instance, the Jewish community will tell you, yeah, most of our forefathers and mothers came through the Galveston project. And from Galveston, they would send them to different regions of the Southwest. There's a wonderful story there. And also help keep these stories coming. Go to cinewest.net. Every single documentary at cinewest.net you can find, and through the magic of digital media, you can download them for $9, and you can keep them in your computer and watch them, share them with your family. So that's my plug.
Cool. All right, everyone.
We'll see you. Hopefully, we'll see you for the Portrait of a Jewish San Diego. Justin and I will conspire to maybe have that as our next
Let's do it.
Presentation.
Let's do it. Have a good afternoon, everyone. See you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye. Have a great Sunday.